When Meghan Markle joined the royal family, she was framed by the press and by the palace as a fresh voice for a modern monarchy, a working actress, a woman of colour, an American, a humanitarian, someone with the potential to connect the crown to a new generation. The narrative wasn't just convenient, it was effective. It sold newspapers, elevated interest, and gave the royal brand a surge of relatability it hadn't seen in decades. But that story, the modern duchess, the socially conscious reformer, the global connector, was never rooted in substance. It was built around projection, and projection, when carefully managed, becomes image. Image becomes platform, and platform becomes influence. From the beginning, Meghan was positioned as a disruptor. In reality, she was a strategist. Her entrance into the royal system was not an act of rebellion. It was a calculated move into global visibility. And once inside, the priority wasn't tradition or duty, it was control. She began building her narrative early. Public speeches emphasized compassion, community, and empowerment. But they rarely focused on specific causes. Her presence at charity events was photographed and shared widely. But the follow-up impact was minimal. The message was never about the issue. It was about Meghan's presence within it. This is where the campaign began. The focus was not advocacy, it was alignment. Aligning with the trend of the moment, the buzzword of the month, the aesthetic of modern activism. From handwritten notes to women in shelters to guest editing Vogue, the moves were never apolitical. They were designed for visibility, approval, and upward positioning in the digital hierarchy of influence. Her interviews followed the same model. Framing herself as misunderstood, misrepresented, or mistreated without ever offering clarity or accountability. The tone was personal, but the execution was strategic. Every appearance, every headline, every soundbite worked toward a single goal, controlling the narrative. And the narrative wasn't about policy, reform, or purpose. It was about identity, her identity. The turning point came when Meghan and Harry began stepping away from the crown. That decision wasn't a retreat, it was a relaunch. They weren't disappearing from public life. They were re-entering it under new terms, terms where they owned the story. Spotify, Netflix, Archetypes, and Oprah were not accidents. They were assets in a rollout. Meghan became the product, the voice of empowerment, resilience, and female leadership, but only in broad, polished terms. The details were vague. The messaging was curated. The criticism was framed as injustice. And the result was a brand built around being above reproach, not because of what she stood for, but because of what she represented. Her public image became a mirror for the audience. Whatever value you wanted to see, Meghan reflected it. She spoke in universal affirmations. She quoted trending slogans. She appeared in monochrome palettes, minimalistic settings, and produced interviews that felt intimate but said very little. This was not failure. It was the strategy. Because when substance is lacking, style must carry the message. And when the message is vague, the audience fills in the gaps with meaning. This is how brands are built in the modern era, not with policy, but with presence, not with results, but with perception. The campaign was not illegal, unethical, or even unusual. It was simply shallow, carefully polished, broadly appealing, and fundamentally hollow. And for the monarchy, an institution rooted in image, it was a direct threat. Not because Meghan was radical, but because she was better at the game than they expected. Her brand wasn't built to support the crown, it was built to outgrow it. She claimed modernity. She claimed independence. She claimed a story of being silenced. But what she really claimed was the microphone. And once she had it, she made sure she never had to give it back. What followed was a media storm, but also a test, not of loyalty, but of strategy. The royal family was built on restraint. Meghan's campaign was built on reaction. They played the long game. She played the algorithm. And for a time, it worked. She received attention, support, sympathy, influence. But slowly, the pattern became obvious. Each new project followed the same model. Introduce a theme, center the narrative on herself, deliver polished, high-production content, and avoid measurable goals. Archetypes was marketed as a podcast about breaking down labels. Instead, It was a series of conversations that reinforced her own positioning. The Netflix special promised insight. What it offered was promotion. Even her philanthropic messaging was inconsistent, jumping from maternal health to racial injustice to climate, with little continuity or actionable follow-through. This wasn't advocacy, it was adjacency, proximity to meaning without the burden of execution. And audiences began to notice. By the time Spotify cut ties and the Netflix deal stagnated, the campaign had lost momentum. The problem wasn't the press. It wasn't the palace. It wasn't public bias. It was the product. You can market meaning, but you can't manufacture legacy. And Meghan's brand, though globally recognized, lacked the one thing influence can't fake: depth. She tried to embody the modern royal, the future-facing duchess, the global voice for change. But in the end, what she built was a mirror. It reflected attention. It absorbed praise. But when the world looked closer, it found very little behind the glass. This was not a failure of intent. It was a success of strategy, executed perfectly until the story ran out. And that's when the silence from Kensington stopped being passive. Because while Meghan ran a campaign, someone else had been watching. And in Chapter 3, the focus shifts, not to Meghan, but to Kate, and what happens when strategy meets legacy.